This is TV Ate My Dinner. My name is Sean. I'm here with Lynn. So I think the story plays out as properly in the slasher genre. I think it actually works pretty well in that. But I think the commentary doesn't work in that genre.
Yeah, I feel like if they had just left out the bit where they're talking about it, or tried to take the discourse in a different direction, the rest of it I feel like worked. The whole plot where somebody is somebody else's child,
well, people
uncle,
just can't
that
help
sort of thing.
With that. Now there's been enough time
and got over the top in a way that was almost funny.
I did actually like that because that's an element you don't see in the Scream movies, where she like has schizophrenic hallucinations of a digitally de-aged Skeet Ulrich telling her stuff. And it's for us.
Stab that guy.
She has no mental image of what he actually looked like, especially near the end
I guess she's seen photos.
The film. But maybe, but he looks like he did, like in the end of Scream. He doesn't even look like he did at the beginning, like where you'd see like the nice pictures, but he looks crazy and weird. And I know maybe she's imagining him that way, but I think
I did like that it gives a different element to that character, like that he clearly did just hook up with Sydney just so he could murder her and mess with her head, like he was fucking around because
right, yeah, like he was working other, and who knows, like he was like, well, she's not the only person I'm gonna kill. I got to get around. We got to build a narrative, because when you think,
well, he's a teenage boy and he just wanted to have sex.
Yeah, she
wasn't doing it.
And if you watch now some of the elements in Scream don't line up with that, because they are like, it's the year anniversary of your mother's death and all that. So they did build a little bit of pageantry around Sydney specifically, but at the same time, like he attacked her on like the day after he killed Drew Barrymore, and she got away. But I guess based on the narrative, were they just not going to kill her, just chase her around until something ran them off? Because they seem very intent on actually murdering her in that scene. But then later, like, we're saving everything until this year anniversary. That's baked into the plot, so it doesn't come to fruition in.
It's one of those horror movie things where it's like, this is what I meant to do all along, and it's like, why did you blow up the house earlier then?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I feel like
I could have died then.
There's so many different things that could have kept that from happening the way you intended.
I want to watch the movie where it all just goes tits up for the killer. And that's one of the things. So we were watching Scream in the theater and with a bunch of kids, and they couldn't figure out why we were laughing, because every time the Scream killer gets beaten up, because it's supposed to be a normal person. So they show that by having them get the crap kicked out of them all the time. And they're just like that. Someone punches them in the face, they get kicked in the leg, they're falling over. They're just falling over randomly, almost as much as the heroines do. So we're just laughing and like,
I'd actually like to see a little bit more of that. They do that in the new one a bit, but whodunit?
If you're going to do something new with the genre, if you want to do a Scream 5 and show something different, show the killer, be the killer. Like, for once, show us the behind the scenes or something like that. That would be something completely new that they haven't done.
That's something that they could do in
the genre. I mean, they've done it in the genre before, but
I don't know if they think that the whodunit element is necessary in all the movies, and that's why all the movies play out the same way, and they all have the same. My biggest problem with Scream was that big Scooby-Doo ending, because then you're like, we're both the killer, and I was like, oh, the killer was more interesting before I knew it was you two. And then
they were kind of
for
weird.
Every sequel. Yeah, they weren't scary. Obviously, they're funny. They're being silly and making jokes and stuff. And like, how did you get
in the first movie
anything without?
It works because those two are already, as you said, you go back and watch, like, they're clearly the killers. They're really creepy the whole way through. Like the scene in the video store where they're making fun of Randy, and the two of them are together. They're exactly the same in that scene as they are in the end scene.
Yeah,
whereas you get this modern Scream, the modern Scream, the guy, like, as soon as you find out he's the killer, he becomes a completely different personality. And you're like, well, how are we supposed to see that coming? Because he had a completely different personality the whole time. He wasn't giving us any of those hints that the rest of the ones do. So
yeah, and
then they become, we're so psycho, we're so crazy.
Like,
I'm dating a 16-year-old
This guy is, well, he's not from the town because they met online or some nonsense. But like, you have to create relationships that aren't previously known. What made it work so well in Scream 1 is they were best friends. At the beginning, we knew, like, when, like, oh, you're in this together. It's like, well, yeah, we've been thick as thieves for this whole movie, acting weird and everything. Like, just every now and then someone acts a little weirder and takes the heat off us for a minute. But once you see it, you're like, oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Those guys are obviously the killers. But in this one, yeah,
I mean,
we
especially
have
when
to have
it's things
so
like
much exposition
his
about how
ex-girlfriend
we
gets
met.
killed.
I think if you
Works.
have to have a how we met explanation at the end, you know that your twist doesn't really work, because I'm having to tell you so many things that happened prior to the movie or off screen, and there would be no way to know, because I only watched Scream that one time, the new one, yesterday. But I'm pretty sure if I rewatch it, I'm not going to see any nuances. Like you said, those characters, there's nothing in those performances, nothing that indicates that they knew each other, and everyone, they did a good job because everyone acted weird in a certain way, and they played with the we all know that one of us is the killer, ha ha, kind of thing so well that by the time they got to the end, everyone had been accused and answered to it to some degree. And I kind of appreciated that. But yeah, it's not as satisfying as in the first one, because those guys are so good in the performance.
They also kind of address that it's always the boyfriend thing in the second movie. So it's like you're supposed to think that it's him, and then it's not him, and then it's like, ooh, we killed him anyway. And but he doesn't act creepy in the second movie, so it's like, it would have been better in the second one if he had have acted creepy and then wasn't the killer.
What's weird is the Force Awakens.
That's just Cotton Weary's job, though.
That's, you can keep coming back to that and see, like, oh, I see less homage to the other Scream films as I do to The Force Awakens, because you do everything they do in that movie. Because not only do you kind of get things going on their own, then start randomly bringing in legacy characters that sort of interrupt the movie and make it about them. There's like a big meaningful death that is meaningful if you are a fan, but within the framework of that one movie, it wouldn't mean that much to you. And the third
the old drunk guy died
is sort of off the rails because of that. Yeah, spoilers. But I don't know.
So the horror elements of Scream did kind of work, in that the slasher bits worked and you kind of cared if characters died. Some of the new characters were okay.
And it was brutal, and I liked the new people in it. I thought they did successfully. I mean, not so much as the first movie.
The twins survived.
But I thought that they introduced, I just mean as far as introducing good characters, I think they did a pretty good job. Yeah, they've left enough of them alive that they could do sequels. Because if they...
which is the problem with number 4, because everybody died.
Well, see, that's the problem. Like, if you... What you want to do is bring in your legacy characters long enough to pass the torch. Like, so your new characters have to work. Star Wars did that well in some places. Like, Force Awakens got kind of derailed by Han Solo, but Luke's positioning in The Last Jedi was good, because he was supposed to be the cranky old mentor figure. And then same for Leia. They weren't eating up the movie. They were taking that role of the older, wiser, or older and misguided sort of mentors, but leaving center stage to the new characters. And then in the third movie, they only brought in Lando, so you know the legacy characters. I mean, they had a cartoon version of Leia.
The third movie was such a mess. But we need to go into that again.
Yeah, there's no point. Like, if you guys are really committed to this Star Wars thing, I don't think I'd keep making Scream movies like the new Star Wars trilogy. I would definitely, what I would think is, now that you guys have used the legacy characters to introduce your batch of new characters and storylines, I would leave those legacy characters out of it. Because first of all,
don't call Sydney. She's just gonna rock up with the guns.
And if you're a fan,
badass. Like, Sydney rocking up with guns and just going, we've just got to kill him. That worked. It worked for Sydney. It worked for her character.
Yeah, and I actually could have seen a little bit more of that, but you can't have the characters center stage when they're so in control. So either there are no stakes when the old characters show up, or they immediately fall back into the versions of who they were in the previous films. And you don't want to see either one of those things. So what you need are these characters sort of sidelined so that the challenges are left up to the new characters. Because you want Sydney to be to the point where if some idiot in a mask comes at her, she's ready for it because she's been there for that shit. And the
only reason she doesn't shoot every one of them on sight is because there's so many idiots who just rock up and try to scare her.
Yeah. And having Dewey there, it would have been a good thing. But then his death is pretty silly because, first of all, a bad observation of the tropes on his part is what leads him to get killed. And second, we find out that it was the girl that killed him. It's like
the tiny little girl.
They had like a physical fight. Like Dewey, I know you have like nerve damage and all this stuff, but that's supposed to be a hero moment for him where he's like, I'm gonna fight you and all this. Like, well, now you just got beat up by a little girl. We found out.
Yeah, that didn't make any sense. Like, I know that they use the same stunt person to be the person in the mask, so we don't figure out who it is, but it needs to still make sense at the end.
Yeah, and that's something on you guys too. You can't be picking unless the accomplice isn't dressed like Ghostface, because the accomplice doesn't necessarily have to be the one in the costume, because you got people making calls and providing cover while the other. That's why you can never figure out who it is, because there's always two killers. But in that case, you actually had the boyfriend in that scene, so you had to say it was her because there wasn't another person.
And that's what worked in the first one, because most of the time you didn't know where either of those boys were. And most of the time, like a lot of the kills, it could have been either of them.
And they're always messing with you because they always show up right after the killer. And you're like, is he or isn't he? Like, but they do it so often that.
I mean, the first kill was clearly Stu. It was clearly Stu had an alibi the whole night, so it had to be Billy. But
yeah, and you realize later on because, you know, oh man, he went to see his girlfriend like right after he was done killing that girl, because that's the progression. Like,
yeah, and tried to get her a panties
too. I was just thinking about you and how we don't have sex. It's like, hey, geez, this is very weird in retrospect. Yeah, I mean, it was weird already. I guess it's not weirder. Like, he was still a murderer. The timing doesn't make it that much weirder. But yeah, so yeah, like Stu had his alibi. And
that's why they have two of them.
Fun conversation where he's like, I didn't kill anybody. He's like, no one said you did. So why don't you shut up? Like, that's such a perfect exchange, because the smoke screen for that is that we're supposed to think that Billy just doesn't like that he's tactless and that he keeps bringing it up. But really, later on a rewatch, you realize that Billy is legitimately terrified that this idiot is going to give the game seconds after they committed the crime, because they obviously they've had this master plan. They killed someone a year prior and just laid low, and now they're like finally get to where they're going to start their murder spree on the anniversary, and they're like, this guy's like a ticking time bomb now. I don't know if he's going to be able to contain himself. Yeah, and they do at the end. They end up at each other's throats at the end because they're both psychopaths.
Through the phone, Dick.
Yeah, it's the best. I actually love Matthew Lillard. I think it's a wasted opportunity that they don't bring him back.
They were going to bring him back in the third movie.
I know. Do it now.
And they should have done that in the third movie, because like you see the television drop on him, but not really a death. Like, you can call it a death, but like he's not confirmed dead.
Yeah, they didn't ever shooting people.
Bringing him back in the third movie would have made so much more sense than what they actually did.
Well, and it'd be fun if you wanted to bring in legacy characters. That'd be more fun. I was actually disappointed because they revealed that the girl was one of the killers, and I was like, oh, okay, so she's the other one. But so is like Matthew Lillard or somebody going to show up? Because they got Skeet. So if they get Skeet, it feels like maybe they're trying to hint at something.
Matthew Lillard to be all about it. I spent the week after I watched it watching all of the.
There's so much planting for it, and no payoff. Yeah. Because they continuously mention him to the point where people have forgotten that he was the accomplice, and there seems to be some annoyance. Like, they're like, no, it wasn't just Billy Loomis, you know? So you would think, because it's that first kill where he's doing the Friday the 13th trivia. It's like, it's not just Billy Loomis. It was also this other guy. It's like, well, I feel like we're building to him being part of this. And No, I don't know if they were gonna if they had that on tap and just decided not to. But that was
Maybe they were going to bring him in at the end, like with Luke, like right in the final credit scene. Like, oh, also, let's go visit Stu. He's still in that asylum where we left him.
Yeah, that would be a fun one. Because I feel like what the setup for the sequel here is they're doing an arc where the new girl could potentially become the killer because she
I'd
goes
be down with that.
full psycho. Yeah, I'm afraid that they're going to do a Cotton Weary kind of thing where when I first watched Scream and they were like, this guy went to jail and was on death row. In 1 year, it took him to get to, his whole trial is over.
The trial isn't even over in a year in these things. So
yeah, like that happened. That escalated quickly. But so I thought, okay, well, there's your sequel setup. If we're not doing anything supernatural here, then your obvious sequel setup is that dude comes out and he's the bad guy. Because that's, and they bring him into the second film and you're like,
he's the red herring.
They have him here. So it's already weird because I would have thought they wouldn't reveal that he's in the movie. And then, then it's nothing. And then in that
he could have just turned up at the beginning and been the killer. Like they could have been like, "It's you. It's the obvious person for it to be is you." And he's just like, "No, I'm just
always have to be a mystery.
Get my apology."
Because that's the thing too.
And then boom.
After Friday the 13th, none of the Friday the 13th films were mysteries, and that's the smartest thing because after the first film, the mystery didn't matter. But the first film is a mystery film because we don't know who the killer is. But we revealed the killer. We killed the killer. And what do? And they came up with this brilliant idea. It's like, we'll bring in another killer, and then we won't kill that one, and that'll be our killer every time. And that's it.
They tried to kill him in a couple of the movies, and then they tried to bring in a different killer in a couple of movies, and it just never worked.
Jason can't be killed outside of the story or in it, because there's so many people that tried to stop Jason from happening on the production level. It's like, no. He is an unstoppable force. That's part of what makes that franchise work. I mean, because at some point there was no story you could make up that was too ridiculous. Like at the end, they were like, well, I just stuck a lightning rod with him and now he's a zombie and now he's in outer space and now he's full magic.
A few ones that when they've done the reboots for that, they haven't brought back the original survivor.
Because the thing is, there's only two things you can do with Friday.
She got killed in the second movie.
You could do a Halloween 2018 where it's a sequel only to the first film and she is alive 50 years later. Or you take the entire franchise into account and you bring back Tommy Jarvis because he was the only recurring antagonist and he didn't get killed. He's a superstar.
That's what they do in the game. And it's awesome.
Because it's
one of the only ways you can actually kill him in the game. It's like you can call Tommy and he will come and kill Jason for you.
Tommy Jarvis is one of those. There's like horror movies that like most franchises don't have a recurring hero because the villain is usually the hero of a horror film. In that they're the recurring, they're never the protagonist, but they're the recurring element. So that's what we're going to see. And
that's why Scream is one of the few ones where the legacy character actually works.
Yeah, because the only way that they got around that is the Ghostface persona is the icon. And there is no Ghostface person. It gets more and more ridiculous.
And Sydney says it. She's like, every 10 years, some arsehole comes out and puts on the mask and I have to go back and kill him again.
What's in the water?
It's just...
Because, like, this stuff was going down. Now, we find out that Billy was responsible for her mom's murder, too. I think it would have been better if she'd just been randomly murdered by someone else. It's like, because we already had a murder problem in the town before the Ghostface killings happened.